Reaction time, as a definition, is the time taken for a specific stimulus to be recognized and processed. This becomes slower when there's multiple stimuli, which is called choice reaction time, because you have to make a decision about which stimulus to react to. The relationship between the time taken and the number of choices is directly proportional, so that would give you a linear relationship if you were to draw it on a graph. The factors affecting reaction time, gender, so generally men react faster, but the good news for women is that age also plays a factor, and women tend to deteriorate slower than men, so eventually they will start reacting faster. Stimulus intensity, so if you, like a loud noise or similar, players will tend to react faster to that. So for example, the picture here, we've got the 100-meter start. A gunshot is more effective than someone shouting go because it's louder and more sudden, so it's a high stimulus intensity. The limb being used is a factor. It's pretty straightforward. Your legs are further away and then the larger muscles, so reaction time in the leg takes a longer time. The sensory system being used, there's a variation between sensory input from that's going through your eyes, through different proprioceptive mechanisms. Temperature, so if you're warm, a warm body will react faster than a cold body. Levels of arousal and or motivation, so if you're alert and ready for a response, then that will improve your reaction time. And the stimulus response compatibility, so things like when you hear the gunshot, they start running instinctively. If that's a high level of compatibility, if they have to do a different response, then their reaction time will be slightly slower. Psychological refractory period.
Yep, on to psychological refractory period. So it dictates that a response to a stimulus must be completed before a second stimulus can be processed. Humans, as we know, only have a single channel for processing information, so can only process one piece of information at a time. We can use this to our advantage in sport by throwing a dummy pass, for example. The defender must respond to the stimulus of the initial movement before they can process the eventual change in direction.
So here, well, at the bottom initially I've highlighted the reaction time for Usain Bolt's 100-meter world record. There's two other aspects that go into that, two other definitions. There's the movement time, which is the time between the initiation of the action and the completion. And response time is the time between the initiation of the stimulus and the completion of the action. So here the reaction time is the time from when the gun goes off to when Usain Bolt starts moving. His movement time is the time he spends running the 100 meters. And the response time is that overall time, which is the world record of 9.58 seconds. So reaction times can be trained. So this is something that coaches need to be aware of so they can improve reaction time. So conditioning performers to correctly respond to certain stimulus, so basically highlighting the appropriate response in certain situations. Also highlighting the importance of reaction time will also help motivate them and provide an incentive to improve reaction time. So that's a form of motivation. Also, if you're putting some kind of reward or some kind of incentive, that will help motivate them, and that improves reaction time. Physically warming a player up, so like I said, a warm body reacts faster. Things like adequate preparation, so that can be anything from good sleep to good levels of nutrition, and also being appropriately focused, not being distracted. Anticipation, so if you can anticipate to a certain extent the stimulus you need to respond to, then you'll be more ready to initiate your response. So for an individual sport such as sprinting, athletes would practice their start with basically with the gun sound, so that they immediately respond when they hear the gun, so it just becomes conditioned. With a team sport like football, where it's more open skills, more choice reaction is involved, you highlight the relevant stimuli from different choices, so things like having a bib in a game situation can condition a player to select a certain running line, so they can be looking for that bib, and when it comes to a game situation, when they have a similar scenario presented to them, they'll be more likely to react to a certain line and give the pass that they've practiced.
So now we're going to look at learning processes. So this is the long-term change in performance behaviour by committing skills and knowledge to memory. It's aided by both positive and negative reinforcement, which obviously coaches switch between depending on the scenario or the type of athlete they're dealing with. It takes place when information is relevant. Also takes place when the learner is attentive, requires practice, repetition. Does not take place without motivation or drive from the athlete.
And drive was the basis around which Clarke basically proposed his drive reduction theory. He referred to drive as a state of tension or arousal in the body that directly impacts on motivation, because he considers it an unpleasant situation for your body, so it needs to be reduced by certain behaviours. So it's based around the principle of homeostasis, where the body's trying to maintain everything within certain limits. And if you've got a high level of drive in this unpleasant state, that needs to be corrected by whatever behaviour you're being motivated towards. So it means the learning has to satisfy a learner's want for reducing their level of drive. So
Bandura's social learning theory, so it's stated that learning is mostly done through observation of others. There are 4 stages to the learning process: attention, retention, reproduction and motivation. So first of all, it's paying attention to what movement or what skill that you're watching. Then it's retaining what was seen, and then it's reproducing that movement.
Thorndike. So his principle was basically 3 different laws of learning. So the first one was the law of exercise, which is basically rehearsing the movement. So there's a stimulus-response bond, and you can strengthen that connection so that you start to respond more autonomously to a certain stimulus. And when that's reinforced and it goes to long-term memory, that response will become automatic for the correct skill. Law of effect. This is basically about feedback. If the skill is followed by a pleasant reaction, then that strengthens the stimulus-response bond. And if the following reaction is negative, then yes, that bond is weakened. So that comes back to the positive-negative feedback that we talked about for coaches. The law of readiness. So the athlete must both be mentally and physically capable and ready to perform the skill. So basically, if you're a coach, you need to make sure that your players understand and can replicate the basic skills, and they have the physiology to be able to complete further skills. So that needs to be developed before progressing.
So the next learning theory is classical conditioning. Pavlov developed this theory in 1902. So during his research, he noticed his dogs respond to a neutral stimulus in a learned way by salivating when a bell was rung. One pre-existing stimulus and response becomes associated with a formerly neutral stimulus. It's similar to the way that players know automatically to stop play when a whistle sounds.
A different type of conditioning was proposed by Skinner, which is operant conditioning. So it's similar to positive feedback. Again, it's rewarding a correct response to a certain task or situation. The difference between this and feedback is, if you're giving feedback, you might highlight the reasoning why the skill was good and break down the components of that skill, whereas with operant conditioning, it's a simple reward mechanism. So it's done by a coach. The performer doesn't even need to understand or know why. They just know that they get a pleasant reaction from performing the skill correctly. So that in this way, behaviour can be shaped over time until the correct response is reinforced and strengthened. So if you're coaching someone at snooker and you're trying to make them pot a ball, you would provide positive feedback or a positive reaction, an incentive every time they pot a ball. The player doesn't need to know why. And then as you move the balls further away and make the pot harder, the performer will still be motivated to pot if you keep providing that positive reinforcement.
So now on to the trial and error theory. So this involves testing various methods until finding a response that was successful. The problem with this process is that it can be very slow when learning a skill. Some sports have a never-ending process pretty much of trial and error. Think of maybe rock climbing and sports like these. Slight change when we're looking at bench pressing. Slight changes in the angle of a bench press can affect the muscle activation and the efficiency of a movement. A powerlifter receives intrinsic feedback when they hit a strong angle, and it may vary from individual to individual. So lots of trial and error may take place in this scenario.
The next learning theory is open loop theory. So this is basically like the feedback you receive from a skill. So it's open loop theory is the process of stimulating an executive motor program to activate an autonomous motor response. So simply, this is like a discrete skill, so something like a golf swing. So there, it's typically applied to fast, discrete actions where there's a definitive beginning and ending. So there's no time for continuous or intrinsic feedback at that stage, because the skill is already completed by the time you've processed what's happened. So it's common in elite performers with heavily rehearsed motor programs, because they will initiate the motor program and will only be able to receive feedback once that skill is completed.
So the next learning theory is closed loop theory. It's when constant kinesthetic feedback allows for kind of continuous adjustments to affect change within the movement. Seen in lower level performance quite often, so youngsters or level 2, level 3 children. Level two, smoother internal and subconscious feedback is necessary. Level 3, uncontrolled frequent stopping and checking external feedback is essential.
Schema theory is basically a set of rules or parameters within a certain type of skill that can be applied to various situations. So this basically fills in the gaps of how players are able to perform skills in not completely new situations, but in situations they haven't directly practiced before. So it shows how humans can adjust performance to certain conditions. This is necessary. For this to take place, you need a build-up of experience, so that you can extrapolate skills from past performances to initiate the correct one in this slightly new situation. And this process is called transfer. An example of this is goal kickers in rugby, kicking from the tee. Might be facing high levels of wind, and you'll often see that good goal kickers are able to adjust, even though they may not have practiced in those exact same conditions. We're able to extrapolate from their past performances to put the ball where they need to for it to go through the posts.
So now we're going to take a look at Fitt and Posner. So there's 3 main stages of learning. According to them, it's cognitive, associative and autonomous phases. So the cognitive phase is getting to grips with a skill. The performer's highly conscious of what they're doing, their movements during this. Simple cues are necessary. A lot of trial and error takes place at this stage, and there's a focus on knowledge of performance rather than knowledge of results. Coaches at this stage should offer a lot of visual demos and reinforce good behaviour to help the learner at this stage. It's useful to point out similarities with previously learned skills. So, for example, if somebody has played tennis, they can try and point out the similarities with table tennis if you're trying to teach somebody a table tennis forehand, for example, at this early cognitive stage.
And the next stage is the associative phase.